If I had to start over learning Spanish today, I wouldn't do what most people do, but rather I'd follow a simple, proven roadmap that actually gets results fast. Soy Hamid, tengo 16 años y hablo 4 idiomas. Me volví fluido en español en solo 120 horas de estudio y ahora ayudo a otros a lograr resultados similares.
Podré para mejorar mi español cuando no tengo mucho tiempo libre para estudiar español.
And so in this video, I'm going to walk you through that exact roadmap step by step so you can skip all the mistakes and actually start learning Spanish today. The first step is understanding how to actually get fluent fast, and that is leverage, okay? So to leverage something is to use something you already have, like skills, resources, or habits, to achieve faster or better results. And what that means is you get more output with fewer inputs, meaning you get more for what you put in, okay? And in the Spanish learning context, this means that it's getting more progress, aka output, with less wasted time and effort, input, by using smart methods and your existing knowledge and the right resources. You see, people who get fluent faster don't literally have more hours in a day than you, okay? They don't usually study exponentially more than you, okay? I studied a total of 120 hours. My client Eduardo studied for about 400 hours, and we both got fluent in a few months, okay? The reason why people get fluent faster than you is because of leverage, okay? There's people who spend 600 to 700 hours of time spent studying and they still don't get fluent. And the reason why is because of leverage. So imagine two people. One makes $100,000 a year and the other makes $50,000 a year. Would you assume that the 100K person works twice as many hours? No, but rather they make more per hour, meaning they have more leverage. That's the sauce right there. For some reason with money, everyone understands the concept of leverage. Everyone understands that some people make more per hour. But with learning Spanish, it seems like everyone thinks that every hour that everyone puts in is worth the same, when it's not. Some people's 1 hour is worth your 3 hours. And that's why some people get fluent 3 times faster, which is why I save 200 to 250 hours of time spent studying compared to the average learner. Or for example, my client Eduardo, who saved 200 to 350 hours of time spent studying compared to the average learner. The secret is that we had more leverage. Every hour we put in was worth more. And so in the long run, we saved hundreds of hours. And so people who get fluent faster, they use smarter methods that have more leverage. They focus on high impact practice, which is the same thing. And they leverage their existing skills and resources, meaning it gives them more output with fewer inputs, which means fewer hours studied for fluency, which means you can spend those extra hours on things that you actually want to do. Because usually what happens is people try to study and try to make it fun, or they try to add extra stuff around it. And the problem with this is, when you are doing several things at once, then you fundamentally cannot progress very far in all of them. Whereas if you channeled all the energy into one thing, then you'd achieve way more because all that extra energy is being allocated to here, to the thing that you actually want to do. And so change has a fixed cost, meaning if you are trying to reach the end of the street, does it make sense for you to take this path where you're going in a straight line, or does it make sense for you to take this path where you're changing directions all the time? Well, obviously this path, because this path doesn't incur the cost of change. You see, this changing right here, every time they change paths, there's a cost that is incurred there, the cost of change. And so this path is higher leverage because this path incurs the cost of splitting your attention. And so the first thing to understand here is that education should always be educational. Because if you try to mix things that don't match, if you try to mix entertainment with education, you're incurring the cost of change. Because you're fundamentally learning, getting entertained, learning, getting entertained, learning, getting entertained, etc. And what's happening is you're changing paths. And that path change means that you're incurring the cost of splitting your attention. And so when you do something, do it 100%. Instead of spreading yourself thin, focus on one thing, because that's where the leverage lies. And so anything can be beneficial in some sort of way, but you will incur the cost of trying to pick up every gold coin instead of rushing to the pot of gold. And so to achieve X, you want to do the thing that is most directly conducive to X and do that thing a lot of times. And so the first step in this plan is to understand leverage. That when we study Spanish, we want to do it with the highest leverage method possible. Because that way, we can put all our time into studying and get fluent as fast as possible with the fewest amount of hours possible. And by the way, if you're just getting started, I highly recommend checking out the Speedy Spanish Roadmap, which is a free course I made to help you start learning Spanish with these frameworks. and it'll be the first link in the description. The next thing is what I like to call the fluency equation, and this is the method that had the highest leverage. Putting fluency into a formula or an equation, because we know that we want to achieve fluency, it would be this exact formula. And so we understand that we want to have effective communications with natives, meaning we want to be able to have a back and forth with a native. What two skills are included in a back and forth? It's speaking and understanding in the context of spoken Spanish. The only two skills that matter when it comes to learning Spanish would be speaking and understanding, because that's what fluency is. If fluency is having a back and forth with a native, then the only two skills that are required are the only two things that we need to study. And so yes, that means that if you're doing anything that includes any reading or writing, then that is fundamentally lower leverage, because you're incurring the cost of change. You're incurring the cost of something that is distracting from the thing that actually matters. You're changing your paths because you're focusing on things that don't matter, because we know that reading and writing don't matter when it comes to fluency. And so the only two things that matter are speaking and understanding Spanish. And so making this a little clearer, we want to be able to speak and understand Spanish with natives, which means we want to study Spanish that natives speak. And so this is what I call real Spanish. And so whatever you do on one side of the equation, you do on the other side as well. And so if we want real Spanish fluency, we need to speak and understand real Spanish. Okay? Now, to refine this even further, what is Spanish? Spanish is grammar multiplied by vocabulary. And so if you think about what a Spanish sentence is made up of, it is the words, so vocabulary, and then it is the logic and the framework behind those words, right? It's basically how you got to those words. How did you create that sentence? Where is the logic? Grammar is the logic of the language. Vocabulary is the building blocks of the language. And so the fastest and most effective way to get fluent is to only prioritize these two aspects of the language. And so I'll tell you those stories. So Sweden has a lot of immigrants, which means that there are many people from different cultures. So for example, I'm Azerbaijani ethnically, but I was born and raised in Sweden. And so naturally, I met people from different cultures and different backgrounds and different languages. And so I made two friends that spoke Arabic, okay? One of them is from Iraq and the other is from Egypt. They're both fluent in Arabic, no doubt about that. They're both fluent in Arabic. They can have back and forths with their parents, with natives, right? But they can't read or write Arabic at all. They can't read or write. But you know what they can do? They can speak and understand spoken Arabic. And so they're fluent, right? And not only that, they're speaking real Arabic, right? They're speaking Arabic that sounds native. And so anything that doesn't apply the fluency equation, what you see on screen, these skills, is fundamentally holding you back, even if it slightly helps you. Because you wouldn't do squats for abs, even if squats train the abs a bit, right? You would just do crunches or any other ab exercise, because the ab exercises train the abs. Squats do train the abs, but just not as effectively. And you want to choose the most effective path. And so if you know that this is the most conducive to your goals, then why would you focus on anything other than this? Because we have this sort of idea that we always want to do new things, right? Duolingo, this Spanish book, this new Dreaming Spanish comprehensible input method, this fluency equation, right? We see all these different methods. They all work, but none of them will work if you spread yourself thin through all of them. The difference is you want to focus on the things that get you the most output for the fewest amount of inputs. And you know that probably isn't going to be reading a book, because when is reading a book going to help you in a conversation with a native? It won't. When will listening to slow Spanish help you in a real conversation? It won't. Right? Sure, it's correlated. It might help you a bit, but just like how squats train your abs a bit, it's way less effective than training your abs directly. And so if you want to get fluent the fastest, why wouldn't you train your fluency directly? Right? And so anything that isn't part of the fluency equation will not get you closer to fluency than the fluency equation itself. Okay? So reading a Spanish book might get you closer to fluency by a small marginal amount, but it won't get you closer to fluency than just doing the fluency equation itself. And so anytime anyone ever got fluent in any language was through this equation. And this is just a fact of the universe, as much as gravity, right? The first step is understanding leverage and that we should implement the highest leverage methods into our Spanish learning. That's the first step of the roadmap. Second step is how that looks in Spanish. What does the highest leverage method look like in Spanish learning? So now the third step is how do we actually implement it? Okay? How do we actually tactically today start doing this? And so the question is, how do we improve the skills of speaking and understanding spoken Spanish? And the answer to that question is very simple. By speaking and understanding spoken Spanish. That's right, you get better at what you do by doing it. And so you get better at speaking and understanding Spanish by speaking and understanding Spanish. And so to get better at understanding spoken Spanish, we should listen to spoken Spanish, and specifically native Spanish, and specifically real Spanish, because that's what we want to achieve. Understand the spoken Spanish, and then repeat those two steps over and over again. And to get better at speaking Spanish, we have to speak Spanish, understand how to say something in Spanish, and then repeat those 2 steps, right? And so we're literally practicing the skills required to get better at the fluency equation and thus get fluent, right? You notice that this is very simple but not easy, okay? If it was easy, everyone would be fluent, but it is very simple, okay? The problem is there are so many distractions out there and so many different things that are making people change directions, and therefore everyone's incurring costs of changing directions and focusing on things that don't matter, like Duolingo and dreaming Spanish and reading books, that they never actually focus on the things that matter, which are the skills that actually get you fluent. And so this is what they look like visually, and I call them the learn and serve ladders. And so fluency is technically at the top of these ladders, or at least at a point of the ladders, if you want to visualize it that way. And so the more you climb, the better you Spanish will get in terms of fluency. Not in terms of reading or writing, but in terms of fluency. And by all means, by the way, if you want to get better at writing letters to your Spanish-speaking wife, go ahead, learn how to write Spanish. 99% of people who are watching this, they want to actually communicate one-to-one with natives, right? They want to have a back and forth. They don't necessarily care about writing. And by the way, because English and Spanish have the same letters, it is basically if you get fluent by speaking and understanding, you will just automatically be able to read and write. It's just it just happens naturally. And so here's the full roadmap just laid out. So step by step, this is how we'd implement the fluency equation, okay? Now, you can start with any one of these. You can actually start with the entire fluency equation at once. That's what I've seen a lot of people do. As kids, that's what we were doing. If you ever want to wonder, oh, how do we learn our native language as a kid? It's this. You were just speaking, in this case, we replaced it with English, right? You were speaking real English and you were understanding real spoken English for your parents. And English is just made up of grammar and vocabulary. Now, this is how I'd approach the 3 steps. This is how I got fluent. This is the order that I took. And this is what I recommend for you to do. And so you can either start by learning the grammar or the vocabulary, since we have to speak Spanish or understand Spanish. And so Spanish is grammar and vocabulary. So we only have grammar and vocabulary to choose from. I think starting with grammar is better. And technically, you'll be doing both at the same time, because when you're learning grammar, you have to use examples, and the examples will have vocabulary. But I think that starting with grammar is the best because it's a logic of language, and the logic is the hardest to learn and takes the most time, so you want to start with it. Then we go into vocabulary, which is where we learn Spanish words, and specifically vocabulary in the context of real Spanish, meaning how natives actually speak. And then finally, we can practice the other side of the fluency equation, which is having conversations with natives. And this is because native conversations is just the same thing as the fluency equation. And that's what this equal sign means. Equal sign means that it's equivalent to, it's the same. And so to implement this, you would speak and understand Spanish grammar through audible sources and usually online courses and videos because they are audible. You would learn vocabulary through speaking it and also listening to natives to speak it. And you can do this through conversations as well, of course. But I like to do this through native content. And then finally, you can start speaking Spanish with natives, and you can do this through Hello Talk, or you can also join the Speedy Spanish Hub, which is a free community I made where you can speak Spanish with others. And so that's how you can do it, okay? I have frameworks where I go into exactly how I like to learn grammar, vocabulary, and do native conversations, but this is the full roadmap. These are the 3 steps I would take to get fluent in Spanish if I had to start over from scratch. So if you enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate it if you liked, subscribed, and just did all the metrics. It really helps me. And yeah, otherwise, I hope you enjoyed and stay humble.